I never imagined my 28th birthday would end with my sister trying to have me kicked out of a country club. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's never to expect normal from this family. The Madison Estate Country Club sprawled across 40 acres of manicured Connecticut coastline, its white columns gleaming under the afternoon sun. I pulled into the valet in my old Honda, wearing simple jeans and a cotton blouse. Straight from the city, straight from work, straight into a trap. I should have seen it coming. Claire had texted me that morning, "Family lunch at 1 p.m., don't be late." Nothing about formal attire, nothing about expectations, just another of her setups. Claire stood at the entrance, flawless in a designer dress that probably cost more than my rent for a year. Highlighted hair, perfectly styled, jewelry glittering like it belonged in a magazine spread. Mom hovered nearby, Chanel from head to toe, commanding the attention of a small group of women who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion editorial. "There you are," Claire said, voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "We've been waiting." The emphasis was clear. "You are the problem." "Sorry," I said, trying for casual. "Traffic was rough coming in from the city." "The city," Mom repeated, a faint sniff of disdain. Claire's friends turned their eyes to me, scanning my outfit with barely concealed judgment. I'd seen this look before. All my life, actually. "Well, shall we go in?" Claire said, her smile tight. "I'm starving," I replied, relieved to move inside. We stepped into the grand foyer. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, walls lined with oil portraits of past members. The club breathed old money, prestige frozen in architecture. Claire announced us to the hostess with an air of entitlement. "Miss Thompson, right this way." Seated near the windows overlooking the golf course, I felt like an intruder in a scene that wasn't mine. Mom ignored me, scanning the wine list, while Claire leaned in to share news. "Richard proposed," she said, practically glowing. "Congratulations," I offered warmly. "That's wonderful. And we're having the engagement party here next month, the wedding too. The club is perfect, very exclusive, very refined." Her eyes flicked to my outfit. "Yes, quite beautiful," I said, meaning it. Mom interjected, her tone sharp. "We're fortunate to have memberships here, thanks to your father's connections. Claire and Richard's standing helps maintain our family's position." The message was clear. I contributed nothing. Claire's engagement had elevated her status, her family's social circle, her flawless life, everything polished and measured against me. I smiled through lunch as they ordered lobster and creme brulee, their conversation orbiting around seating arrangements, guest lists, and prestige. I was the ghost at the table, present but unseen. And then it came, the subtle attack cloaked as concern. "Emily, last time you appeared at a family event, well, you didn't exactly dress appropriately." "That was Thanksgiving," I reminded her. "At your house, casual was fine." "Casual doesn't mean impoverished," Claire said, smirking at my jeans and sneakers. "Honestly, Emily, you're 28. When are you going to get your life together?" "I'm doing fine," I replied calmly, knowing any defense would be met with disbelief. I'd built a life, a company, multiple properties, and yet here I was, dismissed because I didn't fit their script. The engagement party talk intensified. "We're keeping it intimate," she said, her eyes flicking at me. "Just our inner circle." I stayed silent. The message was clear. You are not welcome unless you conform. Mom's critique landed next. Appearances matter, Emily. Connections matter. You can't just show up looking like this. I'm happy with my life, I said quietly, ignoring the whispers and glances from other diners. Claire, undeterred, raised the stakes. Actually, you can't leave through the main entrance just like that. People might think, well, not that you belong. I froze for a moment, registering her intent. She wanted to humiliate me, force me to exit through the service entrance, like a servant. I'm not leaving through the side door, I said firmly. I'm a member here. Claire's face hardened. You? Do you know what membership costs? You can barely afford your apartment. Then perhaps you should check the records, I said, voice steady. Her gasp was faint, but I didn't let up. I'd learned long ago that my family thrived on assumptions, not facts. Claire's next move was almost laughable, calling over the security guard. Could you remove this poorly dressed person? She's embarrassing us. The guard looked at me, confused. A quiet tension rippled through the foyer. Patrons paused mid-step, eyes flicking between the scene and their phones, sensing the brewing scandal. Claire pressed further, louder this time. She doesn't belong here. Escort her out, please. I met the guard's gaze, calm. Then, like a scene from a movie, David Morrison appeared. David, the club director, distinguished in his 60s with decades of experience mediating disputes among the elite. He stepped in, authoritative yet composed. What seems to be the problem? He asked, surveying the room. Claire's story poured out in rehearsed indignation. Mom chimed in, adding color. She's dressed like a homeless person, completely inappropriate. David looked at me, and in his eyes I saw recognition, curiosity, then alarm. Miss Thompson, he said, carefully, a new professionalism settling into his voice. Shall we revoke their memberships? The foyer fell silent. Gasps, phones raised, eyes wide. Claire's mouth opened, closed, frozen. Mom paled. David continued. Mrs. Thompson and Miss Thompson, according to our records, are sponsored members under the primary account, but the primary membership belongs to someone else. I nodded slightly. Claire's confusion was palpable. Someone else? Yes, David said. The membership and the club itself has been owned by Miss Emily Thompson since 2019. All dues, privileges, and facilities have been under her account. The words landed like a thunderclap. Mom gripped the chair. Claire's eyes whitened, mascara smudged with disbelief. I stayed calm, letting the reality settle around them. The silent power shift had begun. You wanted to remove me, exclude me, and judge me. Yet, I own it all. The shock, the humiliation, the realization, it was theirs to process. And I, for the first time, felt the weight of quiet triumph rather than anger. The scene was set for the next chapter, the reckoning, the confrontation, the closure. But that comes next. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe. The moment the shock settled over my family's faces, I realized something. Silence carried more power than any argument I could make. Claire's mascara-streaked cheeks glistened under the chandelier's light, and Mom's hand gripped the chair like it might save her from reality. Around us, the club's quiet murmur had transformed into a tense hush, all eyes watching the unraveling of their assumptions. David Morrison, ever the professional, gave me a respectful nod. Miss Thompson, shall I escort Mrs. Thompson and Ms. Claire Thompson to their table? His tone was polite, but firm. It was the authority I needed to reclaim my dignity without raising my voice. No, I said, calmly, surprising even myself. They can stay, but make it clear, they are sponsored members only. They have no authority over club policies, no control over who is admitted, and no power to request the removal of anyone. Understood? David's brows lifted slightly, a hint of approval in his eyes. Understood, Miss Thompson. I'll update the records immediately. Claire's lips parted, desperate. Emily, please! Not now, I said, my voice measured. Not until you understand what this isn't about. This isn't about money or status or some petty revenge. This is about respect. You dismissed me, minimized my life, assumed I was nothing, and today you learn that assumptions don't define reality. Mom's voice wavered. Emily, we didn't know. You didn't know, I repeated softly, but you assumed. And assumptions hurt more than any lack of knowledge ever could. The room felt charged with tension. Guests paused, some pretending to sip champagne, others subtly glancing around. Phones were out, capturing every moment. My family's social circle was about to get a very different story than the one they told themselves for decades. Claire wiped her tears, trying to compose herself. I didn't know you were capable of all this. I thought you were, just struggling. I shook my head. You didn't think. You assumed. That's the difference. Mom, still pale, managed a faint whisper. But the apartment, the job, why live so modestly? I smiled almost gently, because I wanted to live a life that wasn't performative, a life that's mine. I measure success by what I build, not by how much it impresses others. David cleared his throat softly. Miss Thompson, shall I escort Mrs. Thompson and Miss Claire Thompson to their table? His tone was polite, but firm. It was the authority I needed to reclaim my dignity without raising my voice. No, I said, calmly, keeping my focus on the lesson unfolding. But please, make sure their lunch is covered. Claire's sobs had quieted, and Mom seemed frozen. I turned to leave, sneakers squeaking against the marble floor, the sound echoing louder than any words I could have spoken. Before stepping outside, I paused, giving them one final message. Claire, if you want me at your engagement party as your sister, as someone you actually value, then send me an invitation. If I'm just decoration, save us both the trouble. Then I walked through the main entrance, holding my head high, fully visible to anyone who dared to glance my way. No service doors, no sneaky exits. Just me, confident, composed, undeniable. Outside, I leaned against my Honda for a brief moment, letting the sun hit my face. My phone buzzed. It was David. Your quarterly reports arrived. Memberships up 15%. Renovations approved for the tennis courts are already attracting new applicants. Well done, Miss Thompson. A small, satisfied smile crept onto my face. I hadn't just reclaimed my dignity, I'd secured the tangible proof that I'd built a life independently without needing anyone's approval. The Madison Estate Country Club wasn't just a membership, it was a statement of autonomy, of accomplishment, of quietly thriving while others assumed I was failing. Then my phone rang. Claire. I let it go to voicemail. Mom. Let it ring. Claire again. Let it ring. They would call for weeks, offering apologies, explanations, attempts to rebuild what had been broken. Maybe they would succeed. But today had taught me a critical lesson. Their approval had never been necessary for my happiness. I slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine. Connecticut's coastline blurred past as I merged onto the highway, back towards the city and my studio apartment, the place that had been my sanctuary, my quiet headquarters. My properties, my data analysis firm, my carefully curated life, all built on merit, effort, and vision. None of it was performative, none of it dependent on anyone's perception. As I drove, I thought of Dad. He'd faced similar scrutiny, carving a place in a world that didn't immediately recognize him. In his will, he'd left me a note. For Emily, who never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. I understood now why he'd done it. He'd foreseen the day when assumptions would collide with reality, and he made sure I had the tools to handle it with grace and authority. The club, the memberships, the properties, they were all mine, but the most valuable inheritance was the lesson. I didn't have to perform to please anyone. My life, my accomplishments, my happiness, they were real, verifiable, and entirely my own. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun had begun to dip behind the skyline, painting the city in hues of gold and rose. I felt a deep, calm satisfaction. This wasn't just a victory over family assumptions. It was a reclamation of self-worth, a quiet triumph that no one could take from me. I stepped inside, locked the door, and allowed myself a small, victorious laugh. Outside, the world assumed what it wanted to assume. Inside, I knew the truth, and for the first time in a long while, that was more than enough. The Madison Estate Country Club would continue to thrive just as I would. But now, every time Claire or Mom walked those marble floors, they'd be walking on what I'd built. Every privilege they'd enjoyed, meals, events, recognition, they'd been using at my expense, oblivious to reality. And while I had no need for revenge, there was a quiet, sweet satisfaction in that irony. I poured myself a cup of tea, glanced at the city's skyline through my window, and thought, sometimes the quietest victories are the sweetest. The past would call, the family would persist, the society would murmur, but my life was unshakable, real, and entirely mine. And that, I realized, with a deep, contented breath, was the ultimate triumph.